Another web page that's a local storage calendar of bills to pay. You've got a checkbox that is tied to a label based on naming conventions so that when you toggle the checkbox checked or unchecked, it changes the color of the background color of the label, and it also puts a strike through on any text that happens to be in the label as well. You also have a place to leave a note here. Now, originally, before you get anything saved into local storage, the text for your little note area is lime green. When you click this save button, that green turns to red for 2 seconds and then to blue. The red color means that the save function is executing. The blue color means that the load function is executing. At the end of the save function, which executes as soon as you click the save button, you will have a 2-second delay before the load function is automatically called at that time. So basically, colorizing certain elements in your web page just gives you a clue as to what function is executing at that moment. Now back to this big save button. It starts off with a linear gradient. As you can see, it's pink, and then in the middle of the button it's white, and then at the bottom of the button it's pink again. So you have a pink, white, pink linear gradient for that button. When you hover over it, the linear gradient changes to lime, white, lime. And if you actually left click on it and hold that holds that mouse button in, this is the active event. And we have the linear gradient now changed to red, white, red. And those are all styles that we'll go over once I go over all the code for the web page. The HTML file has JavaScript at the bottom of the page right before the ending body tag, and we in the head of the HTML file we will point to an external cascading style sheet where we're going to deal with all these different color changes, classes, IDs, and stuff like that. All right, as you can see, we have manipulated some elements on our page. I'm going to leave. I'm going to come back in 3 days. I'm going to run this project in the same. You see, we have all these different browsers: Firefox, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, and you don't see it listed, but I also use Opera. You want to launch it in whichever browser you want to keep using. Otherwise, you can save information in Firefox, but if you open this in Chrome, if you saved it in Firefox, it's not going to show in Chrome. So it's browser specific. So let's open it up in Firefox and see that it is in fact saved what we did over here, and it did. Okay, let's look at the web page real quick. Local storage calendar month.html. You can call your HTML file anything you want. This is just basically what it is. It's a local storage calendar month. It's only a month. It's not a year long. So here we have our opening and closing HTML tags. So you see that this is 417 lines of code, and I've closed up a lot of the code because I'm only going to show it to you bit by bit. Let's open up the head and see what we've got inside the head tags. There's only two things. We've got a title that says local storage calendar month, and that's what you see right here, local storage calendar month, in the tab of the browser. And then here is how we point to the external cascading style sheet, which this is the file, and we'll go over that last. Link rel equals style sheet, type equals text /css, and href is pointing to the name of the file, which I happen to name style.css. We can close the head tag now because we only have two things to look at there. Now the body, the opening body tag, the onload event of the body is set to a function called load underscore empty parentheses. And we will look at that JavaScript, that load function, at the end of this particular file. So let's open up the body tag. The only thing this page is a table. That's all it is. So let's open up the table. And a table is nothing more than a bunch of table rows. So let's look at the first table row. If you notice, we have a TH tag, which means table header. We've given this table header an ID called month that our CSS style sheet will stylize. And it also has a call span set to 7, which means it will run across 7 columns. In between that table header, we have a button. We've given the button an ID that we can stylize called My Button, and that, again, that's a CSS thing that we'll look at. And the on-click event of the button is going to call the save function. So that's a JavaScript. So at the end of this file, we're going to see the load function and we're going to see the save function. And these are the two things that call it. The body, when the page loads, it calls this function. When you click on the button, it calls this function. And in between the opening and closing button tags, we just have whatever we want the button to say on the face of it. Here we have Save September 2019. Save September 2019. Close that table header, close that table row. Let's look at the next table row. Next table row is just all of our days of the week, from Sundays through Saturday. So there's our opening and closing table row tags and all of our headers. Table header for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Close that table row up and let's look for the first week. Opening table row tag. The first table data cell, which is a TD tag, is followed by number 1 because for this month, the first of the month actually started on Sunday, and that's our very first table data cell in this particular row. Inside of the TD tags, we have a div, and this class is set to unhide, which really, we could take that whole class equals unhide off, and it would be the same as keeping it like this. But if I have any code in here that I might want to use instead of having to retype it over and over again, I'll just misspell a class and then it won't execute the class, but the code will still be here. So if I wanted to hide this, I could just spell it correctly. And again, class hide is going to be something that we're going to look at in the style.css. But if I spell it correctly and then refresh my page, it hides that stuff. All those elements are still there. You just can't see them. But we're going to misspell that. You can say unhide if you want. You can put a Z in front of it, an X in front of it. However you misspell it just means, that it's not going to execute. Okay, inside of that div, here's our checkbox. The checkbox needs to have a name, a value, a class, and a type. Obviously, the type checkbox means it's going to be a checkbox. Class equals strike through is giving us the ability to, when this toggles, we're going to strike through the label that's attached to it by naming convention. So that class equals strike through is something else we'll look at in our CSS style sheet. Value equals 1 and name equals 1. I believe it's the name equals 1 portion that for has to imitate in order to attach the label to the checkbox and make the checkbox do something to the label. I got the code that gave me the name and the value being the same thing and the for being the same thing. So if this was name equals box, value equals box, then down here in the label you would say for equals box. They all have to match. And in between the opening and closing label tags, you just put in whatever the bill is. After the label, you want to put in a text input, and the text inputs have to have IDs. Our checkboxes only had names, values, classes, and types. Our label only had a for, and our text will have an ID. They have to be exclusive as well. For every text input, this one's 1, this one down here is 2, this one's 3, all the way to the very last one. We're going to go in order like that. Here's the end of the div and the end of the TD. So we're just going to repeat this process. That was for the first. This is for the second. There's your div, there's your checkbox, your label, your input, and your div. Notice again that for the checkbox, you've got name equals 2, value equals 2. So to attach that label to the checkbox, you have to set for to 2 as well. The input with the type of text for you to leave a note has to have its own unique ID. So since we started off with 1 up here, you might as well go in order because we're going to use a for loop and turn this into 2. Ending div, ending td. So now that you've seen the pattern, you've seen what it's like to misspell the class so you don't hide it, so that you don't hide the elements that are inside that div, and to properly spell it so that you do hide these elements. They exist, they're here, they're taking up space, you just can't see them. So here on the third, class equals hide, there's no bills being shown there. This second, third, and fourth, and all these other things, all these other elements have their div set to a misspelling of hide. No, I'm sorry, a proper spelling of hide, because they're hiding the elements inside. All right, so class equals hide, there's the checkbox, there's label, there's the input with the type of text. So you got the pattern. You keep doing this until you get to the last table data cell of that row, and then you don't forget your ending TR tag to close up that table row. Okay, so that is week 1. Week 2, you start off with your opening TR tag. There's your table data cell for the 8th. Here's your table data cell for the 9th, for the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, 13th, and the 14th. That happens to be wrapping up the next table row, so end your table row tag. Week 3, same thing, table row tag, table data cell, table data cell, table data cell, table data cell. And here's the last table data cell for that row. End your table row. Week 4, another table row, table data cell, all right, there's the end of that table row. One more row. We'll wrap up the 29th, the 30th. Now here, at the end of the calendar, you have the 29th, the 30th, and then you want to fill up the rest of your table row so that you have a nice looking table. So you have the 1st through the 5th of the following month. Just in case you want to remind yourself of bills that you can physically see on this particular page as well, this, even though it's the 1st, you still have to follow your pattern for this page and move on to the next number for the name and the value, the for, and the ID. So instead of changing this all to ones again, go from 30 to 31. That will give every single section in your page a unique set of elements for you to use. You don't want to have this number 1 with the elements inside of this number 1 to sync this number 1, because this is talking about September 1st. This is talking about October 1st. And if you give it the same name, value, ID, and for, then when you check that you've paid this bill, it's going to automatically say that you paid this one as well. So make sure that you follow your 30 to the 31, and from 31 to the 32, and all the way to the end of the page. 33, 34, and finally 35. Okay, that's the end of the last table row. So you have the end of your table. And let's look at our JavaScript now. Here's our opening script tag for JavaScript. This is going to let us use local storage on our browser. var I is going to create the I variable for counting purposes. We are dealing with checkboxes and text boxes. Checkboxes and text boxes. So each for loop is going to identify and iterate through each of those respectively. One for loop is going to identify and manipulate only the checkboxes, while another for loop is going to identify and manipulate only the text inputs. So var checkboxes equals document.query selector all, parentheses and single quotes, input, square brackets, type equals checkbox. And then we're going to do the same thing for the text boxes. Var text boxes equals document.query selector all, parentheses and single quotes, input, square brackets, type equals text. Now let's look at that save and load function. Those functions, I should say. Here's our save function. And here's the for loop I was telling you about. This for loop is going to deal with our text input. Now, there's a slight different wording, if you will, slightly different syntax for each of these for loops. They're not identical, so pay attention to the differences. For I equals 1, I less than or equal to textboxes.length I plus plus, var value equals document.getElement by ID parentheses I dot value. Pay attention to where there's parentheses and where there's square brackets. Pay attention to for I equals 1 or I equals 0, and pay attention to the middle part. I is either less than or equal to text boxes, or I is just less than, because there's a difference in these for loops. And you have to get them perfect or your code won't work. Again, for the text boxes, var value equals document.getElement by ID parentheses I dot value, then local storage dot set item, and in parentheses and single quotes key plus I comma value. And now there's an if condition. If value, if that's true, then document.getElement by ID parentheses I dot style.color equals red. So here in this save function, it's going to iterate through all the text boxes, and if there's a value in any of those text boxes, it's going to set that. It's going to save it to local storage, and then if you have it's whatever you have saved in those text boxes is going to go from its original lime color to red. So you know that you're in this save function when you see that color change to red, because this is the last thing that happens in the save function. Well, no, it isn't. This is just the last thing that happens as far as this for loop goes for the text boxes. Here's for the checkboxes. Now watch the difference in the loop. Pay attention to the differences in this loop, and this is for the checkboxes. Here we start off with I equals 0. For I equals 0, I less than checkboxes.length I plus plus. So after that, we have local storage.set item parentheses checkboxes square brackets dot value comma checkboxes square brackets I dot checked. So these for loops are definitely different. Now here you're going to refresh the page for the color change. This is the end of the save function. We are creating a set timeout so that in 2 seconds we're going to call, this save function is actually going to call a load function. So nobody has to push a button. Once you push a button and you call the save function will call the load function. So var timer equals set timeout parentheses and single quotes load underscore empty parentheses in single quotes, that's calling that function, comma 2000. So the text will be read for 2 seconds, then it will call the load function. And this is the end of the save function, so we can close that up. And let's look at the load function that is being called at the end of the save function after 2 seconds. Okay, again, pay attention to the differences between the for loops for the text inputs and the for loops for the checkbox. For the text inputs, you have I equals 1, I less than or equal to textboxes.length I plus plus, and for the checkboxes you have for I equals 0, I less than checkboxes.length I plus plus. So let's open up both of those loops. Again, this is only for the text input. After the for loop, what's inside of the for loop? We've got var stored value equals local storage.getItem, key in single quotes plus I. And then you have an if condition. If stored value, if that's true, there's a stored value, then document.getElementById parentheses I dot value equals stored value. And then lastly, document.getElementById parentheses I dot style dot color equals blue. So the last thing that happens in the load function is we turn the color that was red to blue. There's the end of the if, the end of the for loop for the text input. Now let's look at the for loop for the checkbox. For I equals 0, I less than checkboxes dot length, I plus plus, checkboxes, square brackets I dot checked equals local storage dot get item, and in parentheses checkboxes, square brackets I dot value, triple equals true in single quotes, question mark, true, colon, false, semicolon. So there's the end of that for loop, and here's the end of the load function. So very, very simple save and load functions to save notes or checkbox information on a web page. So let's close up the load function. If you wanted to create a button that could, when the on-click event for another button can call remove my stuff, you could use this, and I could read over it really quick. I've commented it out so it's not executing, but I left the code here in case I want to use it in the future in a different project, or if I want to create a remove button on this calendar. So here the function is called remove my stuff, empty parentheses, opening curly, var choice equals confirm. Are you sure? So you're going to get a pop-up that's a confirm dialog that's going to ask you, are you sure that you want to remove? You're going to hit the remove button, and you're going to get a pop-up that says, are you sure? Because it doesn't want you to make a hasty decision. It wants to give you a chance to change your mind. If the choice is equal to true, which means yes, you're sure you want to delete it, then you're going to var person equals prompt, please enter your name, comma name please, and var code equals prompt, please enter your code, comma code please. So not only are we going to give you a confirm pop-up that asks you, are you sure that you really want to delete all of this, it's also going to request that you give a name and a code. Now this if condition right here is going to qualify the name in the code that will allow them to process further. So in this particular case, we've hard coded the person in the code. If person triple equals Lisa and code triple equals 1234, or person triple equals Freeman and code triple equals Woodson. That means if you type in for the person Lisa with 1234, or if you type in person Freeman code Woodson, if you do either of those options, then it will go further in the code. If that either of those are true, then you'll go here, and that means that the name and the code password are accepted, so we will allow them to do the delete. In order for them to do the delete, they first have to get the proper name and code, and here they have the for loop. We're going to do the for loop for the checkbox. For I equals 0, I less than checkboxes dot length, I plus plus, local storage dot set item, parentheses checkboxes, square brackets I dot value, comma checkboxes, square brackets I dot checked equals false. So there's that for loop. Now let's do the same thing for the text, all the text inputs where you left notes. For I equals 1, I less than text boxes dot length, I plus plus, document.getElementById, parentheses I dot value equals an empty string, and local storage dot remove item, parentheses and quotes key plus I, and there's the end of that loop. At this point, you're going to refresh the page for the default color change, and this is going to do the same thing that we did in the load function. We're going to see a color change. So we have our timer equals set timeout, and this time instead of calling the load function, we have window.location.reload parentheses true, comma 2000. So that's going to be like you hitting the refresh button, but you don't have to do it. This is going to be a timed refresh. Okay, here's the end if condition. So let's say up here you didn't type in Lisa1234 or you didn't type in Freeman Woodson. You typed in Billy Bob 7XZY or anything other than these two things, that the only two things that they're allowed to type in to get the delete. That means that your name code combination are not accepted. So then you get this else alert. No, now you're going to get a regular pop-up. No changes were made because your name code are not accepted. Okay, so there's the end of that else. And here we have the end if condition. When the pop-up first came up and says, "Are you sure?" Instead of the user saying, "Yes, I'm sure," this time the user said, "No, I changed my mind." So that's where you get to this portion, and it means the user does not want to delete, change their mind. So here we have else alert. You don't want to delete anything, so we won't. And so that's the end of that outer else. The user changed their mind about the deletion. And that completes the end of the remove my stuff function if you do want to use it. Just make sure that you follow the syntax exactly as you see it here. I know it's a little more difficult to read this when it's commented out and everything is gray because you don't see the colorization to help you, but it's still relatively simple to follow. Okay, there's the end of the comment. Here's the end of the script tag, the end of the body tag, the end of the HTML. So that's everything that you need to create that web page. But let's look at the external style sheet, because this gives us our colors and our styles and how some of the stuff works with the checkbox changing the label that's attached to it. First, let's look at the styles for the body. Two simple styles, a margin and a padding. Here's the class hide I was talking about. It just has visibility set to hidden. Dot strike through means class strike through checked plus label. So when we check our checkbox that has the class of strike through, this is going to affect the label that is attached to it by changing the text decoration to line through and the background color to lime. The table that we created has the following style set. It's got a border collapse, a border, a background color, a padding, a font size, a width, and a height, all set. You can change these to the colors and values you want yourself. The table data cells have the border, the background color, the padding, and the width set. Again, you can change these to whatever colors and values you want. The table header has height, background color, and border set. The ID of month has the color, the text align, the font size, and the padding all set. The ID of my button has the color, the padding, the margin, the width, the border, the background image, the font family, and the font size set. So you can change that to whatever you want. And here's that linear gradient that I started out with pink, white, pink. That's how you do a linear gradient. Now, this was for the original button appearance. When you hover over the button, you have pound my button : hover. So now the only thing I changed with these is the background image linear gradient. All of the other styles are exactly the same. And then we have the ID my button active. This is when you actually click on it and it goes red. And again, the only thing I changed here was the background image linear gradient to red, white, red. Everything else is the same. If you want to maneuver and manipulate these to something different just to see what it looks like, then go for it. Okay, after that we have input type equals checkbox. This is how we make our checkboxes fatter than they normally are. We use an MS transform, a MOZ transform, a WebKit transform, and an O transform, and we give all of those a scale of 2. I also added a margin bottom of 5% and a margin of 5 pixels. You can play around with those values if you want as well. The input with the type set to text, we gave the color lime and the width 100%. And finally, the label. The label had the background color, the width, the height, the display, the text align, the font size, and the font style all set. So with that, we have completed all of the code. You've learned a little bit about local storage, for loops, HTML code, CSS style sheet code, and some very simple JavaScript, again, pertaining to local storage.